All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the circus where it remains the same, but the clowns change. I am so excited to be here with my two good friends, Jordan Johnson and Eric Rubenstein. Welcome, everybody, to episode 10 of Coffee, Compliance, and Chuckleheads. It's hard to believe that three people from such different backgrounds are able to find their way to each other and create something spectacular.
Breadcrumbs, baby.
Breadcrumbs. So again, we were actually going back and forth via text messages last night and via email about today's show, and trying to get ready for it, and make sure that we give the audience a good show. I think my analogy for our show was it's like a car wreck. You shouldn't look, but you just can't help it.
Off the rails, guys. And listen, it's been off the rails this week. So I'll tell you, hats off to all the first responders and everybody through the hurricane that's made it through the hurricane. So listen, we have the COVID, we have the hurricane. It's like, guys, what the heck is going on? I think it's total chaotic times. Last night, I'm hiking through the woods, and this sounds crazy. My dogs carried out my wife's Apple Watch, dropped it in the yard. A bird picks it up. She uses the locator, and this thing is like 2 miles away. We never find it. I'm like, what's going on in my life? What did I do wrong? Like, where have I gone wrong?
There was a movie recently, Eric, maybe you saw it, I don't know, but it had to do with a bird swooping in and grabbing hold of something and taking off with it, and it was like really valuable, and the people were like having a meltdown over it.
I'm really more hung up on the fact that Jordan said he was out in the woods taking a walk, and knowing where Jordan lives, I'm wondering if that just meant he was going to the grocery store.
Listen, all I heard when I was going through the woods were banjos.
Was it the music from Deliverance?
Exactly.
Oh, brother.
All right. So as much as I know people enjoy our banter, probably not half as much as we do. I know you guys are tuning in because you want the serious stuff that's going on. You want to hear the latest breaking news. You want to hear what's going on in the world of data analytics, law enforcement actions, and regulatory compliance. So we're going to jump right into it. Usually Eric and I wind up kicking things off, but today I feel like it's episode 10 and we just need to go crazy. So let's give Jordan first dibs at this thing, man. And I gotta tell you, I'm enjoying the do today, man. Seriously,
man, the hair is like it's like a Brillo pad.
So it's looking good, man.
A little crazy, but no, I think we're crazy. Obviously, chaotic times. Healthcare's nuts right now. We're in the final 2-week stretch here of the comments that need to be made for the proposed rules, proposed changes. Obviously, we have comments for the OPPS. We have comments on the MPFS, and so we'll go down the MPFS road. I think that's where a lot of the focus is. The good, the bad, the ugly, and really, the good is they did do some good in it. Obviously, we have remote patient monitoring picks up some codes. And we're going to have some expansion of provider, which obviously that opens some risk to fraud, waste, and abuse, but of who the providers are, what MPPs can do, what advanced care practitioners can do. But really all eyes right now are on the financials, guys. The financials took a pretty big hit on the MPFS side. Now, it's funny because you really have to look at it in context. So you have a global, technical, and professional component. And so when you just look at the pro side, they got a little bit of a bump, right? They got a 1%, 2%, but then on the tech side, you're talking these people that are billing global, and on this tech side, they took a 9 to 12% depending on specialty, and so that was a little misleading. But I mean, those are some huge cuts, and I'm just looking. at some of the numbers. The reason for this was, we talked about this before, but that clinical labor pricing effect that they put into place, and obviously they made the adjustments there. Well, then when they made the adjustments to equipment and things like that, that's when we saw such a big hit on the technical side. But I think, we're seeing just from procedures, I put together, if we did a course, and I just use radiation oncology, a 3D course, 25 fractions, what would we be looking at from just a Medicare reimbursement perspective for the full course, 25 fractions, and it's somewhere around, $9,700 with the proposed cut. For that same course, we're looking at almost a 3.25% decrease to 8,100. So, these cuts are pretty significant. So I think that's where kind of all eyes are, is because you have to take that in context. So we're taking these cuts, but also we're wanting things to be done in those freestanding settings and environments because it's cheaper than the hospitals. So how is this going to work from a physician employment? And then also let's factor in, let's not forget about this. And I've got a webinar later on today, and I'll talk about this. What's going on for staffing at hospitals and clinics right now? Guys, it is a train wreck. When I had my injections the other day of the monoclonal antibody here in Mississippi, not one person that took care of me was from Mississippi. My entire team was from Ohio. Okay. So
wow.
Nurses right now are making anywhere from $80 to $110 an hour, depending on where they're going. So if I'm a hospital and I've got my traditional operational budget, that's, say 100 nurses at a base salary of $25 an hour, whatever it is, you're at $6.2 million for, 100 nurses. Now throw in the rate of what they're making right now, you're at over $20 million. How do you budget for that? How do you account? So take that into account. Now we're going to cut your money with the proposed rule. If that goes through, you're going to see a lot of things adjust. And there's a lot of people that are looking for kind of a lifeline. Honestly, my honest belief is I think that's exactly what it'll take. I think the government is going to have to, good, bad, or indifferent, they'll step in and try to offset some of this.
It's interesting. You had yesterday, there was an article I read. It showed that hospitals' revenue is down something like 20 or 21% from last year, or from the post-COVID world. So the question is going to be continued the continued question is going to be, where's that funding stream going to come from? So we already know that hospitals have very high error rates on their DRGs. And we already know that as a result of those error rates, there's a higher incidence of payment that there shouldn't be as a result of that, with things like sepsis when it's not really sepsis. And then some of the circumvention of things to try to get some of those hospital-acquired infections paid for, or hospital-acquired conditions, as they now call them. Whereas you used to be able to, the hospital, if you were in the hospital and you got a UTI, the hospital could bill for that. Or if you were a fall precaution and you were up strolling around and you shouldn't, you can't get paid for that. So the new thing is just shifting to new DRGs. And I think coupled with that, with some of these reductions, that 9 to 12%, another article I read yesterday talked about how, although they're saying Part B is funded indefinitely because of some fiscal requirements and because of the payments that go in, Social Security by 2032 or 33, 30, something like that. 32 is going to start to become insolvent. They're talking about only 78% or 79% of the current payment is going to be able to be made. And they are linking that also to a similar amount with respect to Part A, because, as most people know, Part A, you don't pay into it. It's essentially the free. If there's some definition of free healthcare, Part A is the free part, or at least, to an extent, with the first 100 days and things of that sort. So, the problem I think becomes, and I've never seen any study that does this, it'd be interesting, is from a fraud, waste, abuse perspective, as these rate reductions occur, do you see upticks in certain types of fraud relative to that? So I think that, Jordan just talked about remote monitoring, and remote monitoring is a pretty important part of like the chronic care management continuum. And you're starting to see a lot of fraud in chronic care management and transitional care management, where that 30-60 day piece comes in on those things. And when you get into that chronic care management and you're supposed to be providing that service, and you're just not providing that service, or you're providing a substandard level of service. And then you couple that from a technology perspective, where if you have your staff going out to the community, how is your staff tracking the service that they're providing? Are they using IT secure EHR systems that can transmit? And then how is that data being transmitted? And how good is that data once it's been transmitted? I think that whenever you've got these issues with reductions in fee schedules on one side, people have to make up that money on the other side. A doc is going to say, hey, look, my overhead doesn't get reduced 9 to 12%. I still have to pay health insurance. I still need to pay my malpractice insurance. I still need to pay my rent. I still need to pay this. Now you're telling me I got to have an interoperability system and an EHR. My personal doctor in New Jersey is still paper. And he says, a ream of paper costs me $5. This hole punch costs me $2. What's your problem, son? And he's able to sit and write it down, where he says, that bump in money that I get on interoperability, he didn't even know it's called interoperability, but he says, that bump I get by using some electronic system, it's costing me more. He's like, but the government is reducing the amount that I get paid for evaluation and management. He's like, that's why I don't take Medicaid. That's why I'd rather have a room full of the bukas, which are paying me a couple $100 for an office visit, than I would be for anything else. So that the 9 to 12.
You bring up a perfect point. We will absolutely see an uptick. And this is what we're trying to teach some of the people, and several of their strong coders and stuff have really reached out, and they're on board with this. They see it, because the only thing that makes up for it is volume. Guys, we've maxed out productivity and operations, okay? Nothing makes up for volume. You're not going to cut enough by shaving an employee's hours by 1% or 2%. It is pure volume. So we're at this intersection now where Eric is 100% right. We've done a study and showed that the MIPS reimbursement, or the bump you get from MIPS, cost $40,000 to get $4,000.
That's
so
right.
You're going to see a correction. We are in the middle of a correction. I don't care what anybody says. As we transition away from fee for service, closures are going to happen. Access to care is still going to be a big deal. Somebody has to pay for it. And the risk has always been put on the physician and the provider. Now, so we're looking at who takes the risk. And all crosshairs are on pharma and the big vendors. Okay. That's it. That's the only place we're going to be able to go, guys. And so it's important that people start putting together these halo pieces. And it's great to see, and we're able to communicate this. Like, don't just focus on what your task at hand job is. Now things are becoming very related. And one thing definitely affects the other, because, Eric, you and Sean talked about price transparency, but commercial rates are going to come down once that gets out. So that's another nail in a tough situation.
Well, aren't these reductions, when you talk about a 9 to 12% reduction, it really does make for us, for Sean, for our side of the puzzle, the compliance and the regulatory piece, it makes for great arguments to be proactive in your audits, because it says, I love the phrase revenue preservation, revenue generation, because now it's like you need to look at these. You need to do these retrospective audits to make sure that when the man comes knocking, that the man is not knocking to take all your money, that you know what the deal is. But also, if you're one of these providers who's really nervous about the man coming, and you're spending your time being a lot more conservative than you need. And we're not talking about people being aggressive in their coding and billing. We're just talking about, are you doing the right things? We just did a training session for a pulmonary group where they had opportunities where they had documents in their record that they could have relied upon to document their notes to justify other codes, review of tests and diagnostic results and things of that sort, where they were just making like a 2-word notation, where they were actually losing the ability to have an actual legitimate code that they could have billed. That, we were like, hey, you guys are missing this. This is a great example where you're going to be losing that 9 to 12% on some things, and you've got an opportunity here where you can actually get paid for something you've legitimately done. The best example always is, are you so conservative that you're billing 99212 all the time, when you really are meeting the MDM, or you're meeting the time requirements now under the 2021 or any of that for the 99213? And even now with my interpretation of the slightly more liberal ability to bill up these codes, here's where you've got to make up that money. And you're not doing it with a fraud, a waste, or abuse mentality. You're doing this with the, hey, these are the opportunities that we've not taken previously. And that's where I think we places like us and you come in and help them with figuring this out, because it really is that revenue generation piece now.
Well, and then if you see that uptick, Sean, turn over to you. But then we look at the anti-kickback, Stark Law, all that, because the NPFS fell apart. The OPPS, the hospital side, saw a bump in everything. Right. Like when we went down their list for every code, it's solid black. And then you look at the NPFS and it's red all the way down. Right. And it's like, so this is going to be really interesting, because then we get into mergers and acquisitions, which the government said they're going to tighten up on. Becerra and Biden and them said they're going to tighten up on the mergers and acquisitions in healthcare. So we're definitely in an interesting place.
Did you say murders or mergers?
Mergers. It could be murders. I mean, it's there could be some murders and acquisitions going on.
I'm getting old, and I'm finding hair in places that it shouldn't be, and I think that in the ear is blocking some of my hearing. But
hey, as you get older, that's good. That's good news for you, because as part of these proposed rules, they're going to make hearing aids available over the counter now. So.
Well, Sean, as you get older, the hair moves to places that you need it. It goes to places you really could care less about it, and that's typically in the southern direction. So if you look down in about a year, if you have an inordinate amount of hair on your ankles, you'll know where it's been.
I'm so glad you said that. So let me get back to this, right? Because Eric, you're spot on. And we had this conversation, I think, last week, right? Because some documentation that you and your folks were reviewing, the physician was sort of upset and not, understanding the rationale as to why you all were saying, hey, the level of service that you're trying to build can't be supported. It's not substantiated. And, for me, I always try to stay away from the term, overcoded. To me, I think it's a negative connotation. I don't think things are truly overcoded. I just believe that 95% of the time they're underdocumented. And for me, EHR, we could get into this whole conversation. I'm not a fan of electronic health records for a number of reasons, right? I get all the positives that are tied to it, right? Everything's in one place. You could read it, blah, 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 blah. But it takes away from the physician-patient experience. It takes away from a physician being able to clearly demonstrate his or her clinical judgment, which ties to the medical necessity, which speaks to the medical decision-making, to your point, or the time. I think physicians have an incredible opportunity to pick up on what Jordan said. Number one, it's going to be based on volume. That's just the way it is, right? Everybody talking about value-based care and the end of volume-based care, it's just not realistic. You could talk about value-based care all you want and how it's going to dominate the market space, but volume is going to be key for a lot of these specialties that are non-surgical, non-procedure based, right? So it's going to be based on the volume of the services that they're rendering. Providers right now need to tighten it up. They need to start understanding the fact that failure to document is what's going to result in these clawbacks. It is. You have non-clinical auditors within the government within the commercial payers who are auditing these medical records who don't understand that one or two sentences to a clinician can mean pages of information. But to somebody non-clinical like myself or to Eric, it means exactly what's on that piece of paper, right? So physicians have got to tighten this stuff up. And you bring up a great point. There's two things. And I want to give a shout out to you, Eric, because I don't think people listening to us or watching us truly understand the impact that we can have in assisting in a bad situation. I have a client out of Florida who was taken advantage of by a criminal mastermind, a criminal organization tied to durable medical equipment. For months, I have been reaching out to the field office at the FBI. I've been reaching out to the Office of Inspector General. I reached out to Cigna Government Services. I reached out to First Coast Service Options. Never getting anywhere. Finally, I just said, you know what, Eric, here's what's going on, right? We got this problem. This individual, we're getting bombarded with phone calls about, patients claiming that the provider wrote scripts for two different braces, a knee brace and a back brace. And, they've never been seen by our doctor, or they haven't, received any of these durable medical equipment devices, right? Braces, whatever you want to refer to them as. Eric was able to send an email to the SAC, right? This is the head person with the Office of Inspector General, and to the head person with the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the local market. Within an hour, we were able to go ahead and schedule an appointment to be able to engage. And it just so happened to be that once Eric reached out to the person that he was the mentor for down there, they automatically reached out to the field officer. And I got this email like the same day, within an hour, saying, I am so sorry for not responding to you on this. Here's what we're doing. I mean, that's how invaluable working with the right people can be. Even for me, as much experience as I have had over 26 years working with the Office of Inspector General, the Department of Justice, the AUSAs, it still needed somebody more ingrained into the programs than what I was to be able to help move that dial. And I know I've said thank you, but I need people to understand this.
I think that's what people don't understand is when you don't, it's like, guys, when you reach out to one of us, it's kind of, reach out to one, you get all of us, and everybody has their unique. And that's really what it's all about. Is it's not one person knows everything and has every connection. And that's exactly how we operate. And I think that's a huge misconception by a lot of people, and even a lot of other consulting companies. If you ever hear anybody say we do it all, you should think twice. Okay. We definitely don't lead with that. I lead with my network, and this is how we do it. But we're at a time right now where this is absolutely needed more than ever. And people really need to be paying attention, engage, because this stuff isn't going away. And I think we're going to see a lot more. I think we're going to see a lot more fraud, waste, and abuse coming.
Yeah. Two things. One, Pam Vanderbilt, I agree with you 100%. We're seeing the same thing. Payers are really clamping down on high levels of evaluation and management service because they're pulling the documentation to be able to make a determination as to whether the provider is billing based on time. And if they are, have they clearly documented everything that transpired during that encounter in order to add up to the time interval that's required to support that level 4 or level 5 service. So I agree with you 100%. And it goes back to what we're saying. And, Jennifer McNamara, said the same thing, made the same point that we're talking about, which is lack of documentation causes a loss of revenue for an organization. But the other thing that I wanted to jump on, Eric, was what you talked about. Providers freaking out about the man coming, right? And that's the reason why there are processes in place to be able to take the wind out of the sails of the government. One of them is the Office of Inspector General Self-Disclosure Protocol. You and I had a great back and forth, I thought, the other day on LinkedIn about this. But so many people are freaked out and they're afraid that if they reach out to the government and say, hey, we made a mistake, that's going to open Pandora's box, and the government's going to come swooping in and they're going to start doing this massive investigation. But that's a fallacy. That's not true. The Office of the Inspector General isn't going to expand beyond what it is that you're coming forward to them to disclose.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we've talked about this ad nauseum. So I think the two things that we talk about the most over the past couple of weeks have been, do auditors get to make determinations of medical necessity? And I wrote a blog about it, and I've gotten a lot of feedback, and everybody is pretty much in agreement with my blog. Everybody has their own take. You had some amazing points, and I hope if we don't get to talk about it this week, we'll talk about next week, because there's two definitions of medical necessity. There's the clinical definition, and then there's the auditor's definition, and they may not be the same, but unfortunately, for the purposes of fraud, waste, and abuse, the definition of medical necessity is oftentimes a slightly different approach than the clinician's view. But talking about the self-disclosure protocol and overpayments, and then the ACA's overpayment definition, I did a ton of self-disclosures when I was at the OIG, and at some point what happened was, the way that self-disclosures work is you make your filing through the Office of Counsel to the Inspector General, what's known as OSIG. OSIG is the one that vets it. OSIG is the one that says yay or nay. Back years ago, when a self-disclosure was sent to OSIG, the OSIG attorney that got assigned would then reach out to the local OIG field office with the agents through the Office of Investigations, where I was, and an OI agent would get assigned. And you would basically go through and do it. And the thing to always keep in mind in a self-disclosure is it's using the Ronald Reagan phrase, trust but verify. And that's really what it was. It was trust but verify. And I teach this class on corporate compliance. Basically, I talk about things like the Philippe memo, the Yates memo, and I talk about just corporate compliance from a variety of perspectives. But the one thing that I make my theme through the course is good corporate citizenship. I want the students in my class to always use that as their forefront, that the self-disclosure protocol is meant to instill and foster good corporate citizenship. If you made a self-disclosure to the OIG and then the OIG turned around and said, no, we're not going to let you in, and by the way, thank you for your referral, here are the handcuffs, it would have a chilling effect. Nobody would make a self-disclosure. The self-disclosure protocol is not meant to say, well, when Dr. Jordan Johnson is making a self-disclosure about this widget, we're now going to go and look at this thing here. It's just not the way it is. It's the lane. And I think that's where people get a little worked up about whether they should make a self-disclosure or not. As an agent, I worked on self-disclosures where providers were self-disclosing behavior that, had it not been for the self-disclosure and had we learned about it, they would have gotten arrested, charged. I'm working on a self-disclosure right now that just got approved. The provider was engaged in actual criminally chargeable fraud. Admissions in the self-disclosure to submitting claims for a service that they didn't to do the service.
Yep.
And in order to stay below the radar, we're submitting some of those claims under other rendering providers' names within the practice. Absolutely chargeable under a criminal statute. Not even like an argument of intent. The service was rendered by Eric Rubenstein. It was billed out under Sean Weiss's NPI number under the group. The documentation showed it was Eric Rubenstein. Services entirely not rendered. It was for for a procedure that required the implantation of an item that the provider didn't have in his office at one point. So we're talking about actual criminal behavior that had this not occurred, this person would have been actually exposed to the criminal justice system. So, and they're in the self-disclosure protocol.
Yeah. And that's what takes it from a civil matter to a criminal matter. And that's what people need to understand. You know, we do a ton of self-disclosures every single year. You know, for me, you know, doing these for the last 2 decades, you know, you become friendly with special counsel in DC, special counsel in, you know, the region where you're actually dealing with the client. And, you know, yeah, you know, when you make a self-disclosure to the Office of Inspector General, not only are you having to make restitution for the overpayments that have been received, you also have to understand that there's a multiplier. And the multiplier could be anywhere from 1.5 up to 3 times treble damages. Now, I will tell you, you know, we have reached an understanding with a lot of the special counsels for OIG around the country that when we disclose, when we bring this to you, when we make a bona fide, because that's what the key term is, it's got to be a bona fide disclosure. We have an agreement that we're able to keep the multiplier at 1.5 times. And
that's
that is
typical. That's your typical, unless it's an extenuating circumstance.
That's right.
And it's written right into the SDP protocol. It's written right in there that
That's
your
right.
typical settlement agreement, your 2 benefits of a self-disclosure, 1.5 damages. So you're saving yourself. Typically, the government does not settle for anything less than double damages on a settlement. If you fight the government and it goes, at least on the U.S. Attorney's side, you're looking at your 2.5 or your 3 times, but you're on a self-disclosure to OSIG, your typical resolution includes 1.5 times and no corporate integrity agreement, but you get to replace a corporate integrity agreement with a corrective action plan in which you create what that plan is going to be, and it's your mitigation strategy, and you're not having to report back over the life of a 5-year corporate integrity agreement, because your typical corporate integrity agreement is 5 years minimum. You're typically not having to have a corporate integrity agreement, which will oftentimes cost you more than anything else, because corporate integrity agreements require an independent review organization, which is usually a law firm, to oversee the administration of the CIA, plus companies like my company, companies like your company, to do the auditing and monitoring and things like that. Corrective action plan, you can outsource a portion of your work to, you know, we're doing that right now on the self-disclosures that we do. We're in the CAP, the corrective action plan, to do the monthly monitoring and keep it within that lane. So you save yourself a lot of money. You save yourself a lot of headaches. It's 1.5 times versus treble. I mean, it's a winning strategy. Now, the thing that people always need to understand is that the differentiator between self-disclosure and overpayment, in a self-disclosure, you have to make an admission of liability on the fraud of what you did. It's not for the purposes of an error. It's not for a mistake. It's not for any of that. That's what the overpayment impetus is for.
That's right.
But the flip side is, if you go and you find that you have an overpayment that is this huge amount of money, and you go to make an overpayment, you give yourself zero protection. You're exposing yourself to all of the liability. And I don't know if a UPIC or a MAC who receives an overpayment of $1 million or $2 million is just going to say, okay, thank you for that money. They're going to do a little bit of a head scratch because it's so big. I just dealt with a client where they assessed an overpayment in some internal audits they did that was $25,000 over 7 years. And they said, should we make a self-disclosure? I said, well, do the math. You're talking about a de minimis amount per year on something in which it actually was. We thought that the hospital maintained the records. They thought we maintained the records. It turns out the hospital did. We billed for it because we assumed the hospital did. it was really an error. Like, when you have the conversation, it's like, you're talking about $25,000 over 7 years. You're talking about $3,000 a year in an overpayment. I was like, how long did it take you to figure it out? She says, well, when we figured it out, we did the calculations. It took us a week. I said, Aka, you've got your time. You're more than happy. I was like, check with your in-house counsel just to get the fine print done. But it's not a fraudulent, it's not hey, I billed for something and I didn't do it. It's a mistake of fact. So
that's right.
Yeah, it's unfortunately, I think OSIG does the best job it can, as I think the OIG generally does the best job it can in sharing information with the public. But the fact that not everybody's on LinkedIn, not everybody is following the OIG website, and not everybody is got attorneys who do self-disclosures. There are more lawyers that don't do them than there are that do. So that, it's, you could be great in healthcare and have an understanding of the self-disclosure protocol. But, oftentimes I think, and it's not a rocket science event. As you know, Sean, the self-disclosure protocol, when you look at it, they outline what needs to be completed. And if any piece of that isn't completed, it gets rejected. It's not a fill in the blank as you see fit. It's fill in all the blanks.
That's right. Yeah. And, going back to your point about ACA, right? So we're talking about the 60-day rule in lay terms. I think, again, for those that are struggling to understand what does the 60-day rule actually mean, it doesn't mean that you only have 60 days in which to issue a refund, right? You have 6 months to conduct a legitimate investigation to identify all of the facts so that you can make, as we said before, a bona fide disclosure to the Office of the Inspector General. You have a total of 8 months. 8 months. 6 months to conduct your investigation, and then another 2 months once you have identified and confirmed your overpayment to issue your refund. So you have plenty of time with the OIG self-disclosure. A couple of last facts that I want to put out there, right, Eric, and please chime in on these. One, an OIG self-disclosure, to your point, should never be the very first thing that comes into the mind of a physician's practice or a hospital, right? One, it's laborious, it's tedious. You better dot every I, cross every T, and you better be making a bona fide disclosure of your investigation, your findings, and the actual dollars that are involved in this, right? Any failure to do that, when the OIG reviews it, and if they reject it, you got a problem. You've got a big problem. OIG doesn't typically reject these if you do them correctly. What people need, right?
Yeah, of course not. I mean, you're coming forward, and it's good corporate citizenship.
That's right.
What I can tell you, if you get a self-disclosure rejected, they don't tell you. Typically they don't tell you the reason. What I can tell you is that one potential reason that a self-disclosure is rejected is because there's already an open investigation by the OIG. Now, there is a clause in the protocol that says that even if you are under investigation and are aware of it, but you can demonstrate a good faith effort.
That's right.
Right. And I'll tell you, in the case that we have that just got accepted, where we're talking about a couple of $1 million on this, our provider received a letter from one of the UPICs requesting records for an investigation. And we had learned that there was an investigator speaking to patients. And the way that we were able to get into the protocol was our provider had identified this problem and engaged us at Advise and a law firm 2 months before we knew that the UPIC was out there. And so we made the self-disclosure. We put a timeline together and said, provider identified this problem on this day. Really, his billing staff identified it because he knew it was going on all along, obviously, but brought it to his attention, engaged law firm on this date. Here's the engagement letter. Law firm engaged Advise Health on this date to help with working out the analytics of it, and the chart reviews on this date. And so We got that self-disclosure in, and about 30 days later, got a letter from the UPIC saying we are closing our matter because it's our understanding you've been accepted into the self-disclosure protocol. It's huge. And so you have to think that if you're not getting into the self-disclosure protocol, it's because of typically one of two reasons. One, you're already under investigation, and it's past that point where they're saying you're not. You'd have to appeal it or demonstrate. Or two, OSIG has identified that your violation is strictly a Stark Act violation, and you have to make it self-disclosure to CMS. So it's not that you didn't make an appropriate self-disclosure, it's that you made your self-disclosure to the wrong entity.
That's right. Can you
and that's
pause
an important piece of that.
Yeah, pause for just a second, man, because you just hit a huge, huge topic, okay? The Office of Inspector General does not deal with Stark unless the violation includes the Anti-Kickback statute or it includes the False Claims Act.
Right.
The Office of Inspector General, man, thank you for making that point. Stark is strictly a CMS disclosure. The problem is with CMS, one, CMS is not rendering any opinions on whether something is or is not a Stark violation. Number two, they are not conducting any investigations as to whether or not a group is violating Stark. We have said this numerous times, and I'm going to say it one more time. The only time that the government involves themselves in a Stark or an anti-kickback case is if you tell on yourself or if somebody else tells on you. These are cases that are almost impossible for an investigation to just simply be launched out of thin air. It doesn't happen that way. But right. So if I could, I agree, Matt. Stark can implicate the False Claims Act.
Absolutely.
But to the point, a pure Stark violation is never going to be looked at by the Office of the Inspector
General.
Right,
not one that's tainted with the referral, right? That's
right.
Some Stark violation in which there isn't a kickback piece.
That's right.
Is not going to be handled there if there's no false claim or causing all legitimate services, things like that. And there are carve-outs, right?
That's
underserved populations. I remember when I first started as an agent, we had a case involving a doctor who was he was the only urologist in the area, and he was looking to move. And so what a hospital did was the hospital said, look, if you leave, this is going to be a problem. And so they had like guarantee salary things for him. They were going to take over they were going to pay for his office in the hospital, move his office from a private space to a clinic space. They were going to be paying for the overhead and things like that. He was in an underserved area and was able to get around that. And the argument being, if he leaves, he's the only urologist with, like, literally, it was in this rural community where there was not another urologist for 50 or 100 miles. He leaves, everybody gets bladder and prostate cancer and dies, right? So clearly, by paying for his office and paying for the overhead and things like that, there's a stark implication there. But when you're in these underserved and there's no other implications involving the referral, he was already sending his patients to that hospital. It was the only hospital in the area. And then there were no false claims or anything like that. Yeah, you have to really get into the weeds on this. But yes, CMS does not. CMS comes up with a policy, and they don't interpret what the OIG interprets, and that's where advisory opinions come in.
That's right. That's right. So real quick, since we're on the Stark topic in anti-kickback, give me just 2 minutes to run through a few things that folks really need to be paying attention to and getting ready for. So, as everybody knows, in November of 2020, the government issued the final rule for both Stark and anti-kickback statutes that were coming down the pike. A lot of people say it was December, but the first one actually was released in November. Doesn't matter. So these are the things that people need to be very aware of. And again, Stark is extremely confusing, Anti-kickback statutes are extremely confusing, as well as what are the exceptions to Stark and what are the safe harbors within the within the anti-kickback statute. So, very quickly, the Stark Law final rule again includes new value-based exceptions. Okay, and again, I'm not going to go through each and every single one of these. We can post something on LinkedIn as a supplement to our conversation, but I want to give you the main topics that you need to be aware of. New cybersecurity exception and modification to existing EHR exceptions. New exception for limited remuneration to a physician. Clarification regarding group practices and designated health services tied to profit sharing. This is going to be, I think, the biggest one. And I'm telling you, I have clients right now where they are physician groups where we have 2, 3, 4, 5 or more. Very, very important. You've got to get a memorandum from your legal counsel on how to structure these. You need policies in place. Don't sit around and wait until the 11th hour. This stuff is coming down the pike, and we're just maybe 5 short months away from this stuff going into full effect. Okay. Also, there are new and revised definitions as well as other clarifications for the Stark Law final rule tied to terms like commercially reasonable and general market value. And the Stark Law further revises key definitions such as volume or value. Folks, please don't try to interpret these things on your own. Get with your legal professionals who are healthcare-centered attorneys. The Amanda Waishes of the world, the Matt Lawhans of the world, the Robert Lyles of the world, the Gabe Empanados, the Lester Peerlings, the Jenna Milligers, the Ronald Chapman, attorneys of the world. These are health law-centered, incredible attorneys. Now, with the anti-kickback statute final rule, just 3 quick things. One, the new value-based safe harbors. So again, we were talking about exceptions under Stark versus safe harbors under the anti-kickback statutes. Again, new CMS-sponsored model safe harbors. And finally, the modifications to existing safe harbors and other new safe harbor for the modifications that are taking place. And we'll go ahead and we'll post something about this later because they are tied to cybersecurity technology services and for accountable care organization beneficiary incentive programs where they're codifying a statutory provision. And I just saw this from Matt Lawhan. Good to see you on here, buddy. You are 100% correct. Stark, just like the anti-kickback statute, is statutory, so it is not simply a CMS issue. Matt, I'll always say nice things about you. I'm not sure Eric Rubenstein will, but I will.
You know, what's interesting about Stark is, I'm going to ignore that. I'll have a separate conversation about that when Matt and I when we do our private podcast that is only coffee and Chuckleheads, where we talk about you two guys.
Awesome.
But the Stark, when I had a Stark trial when I was an agent, it was the one and only civil trial I ever had. It was the first False Claims Act trial that the District of New Jersey could remember ever having. And at the time, it was probably only the 3rd or 4th Stark trial in the country. Civil False Claims Act does not just touch upon healthcare. The Civil False Claims Act is a law that goes all the way back. Its history dates back to Lincoln and the Union and the Union purchasing substandard equipment and coats. I think it was the main thrust of it during the Civil War. But obviously, the Civil False Claims Act, it touches upon everything from anything with government contracting. And we had a trial on a cardiologist. It's a very convoluted case, but at the end of the day, it wasn't as convoluted, except for the fact that I had 3 AUSAs, civil AUSAs, who had never tried a case. All 3 were leaving the U.S. Attorney's Office. All 3 wanted trial experience before they left. And in a fashion that I had never seen before, when we were getting ready for prep, I said, well, we need to start prep, and here's what I think. And they said, oh, no, you just show up on the first day of trial. We got this, buddy. And in my whole career, and look, I had 9 trials in my career, which is in a non-strike force city. That's a lot of trials. I had agents I worked with for 20, 25 years who had 1 trial, no trials. And I had 9, which is a big thing.
Yeah.
That either meant that I was aggressive, people thought I was an idiot, or they thought that they could beat the man. So I don't know. But we lost that trial, the Civil False Claims Act. We lost it. I think we lost it for different reasons, but the main thrust was the Stark was the thing that was charged. It was it's very complicated to explain it. If the lawyers trying to explain it don't understand it, a jury of lay persons is certainly not going to understand it. And so, the big issue in that case was, at the end of the day, the judge polled the jury, and they had some things that they said, well, had the government explained or shown X, Y, Z, we would have been able to have a better understanding. But Stark is so complicated. And then you've got things like joint ventures and designated health services. And now with things like through ACA, through Affordable Care, you've got ACOs that come in, and multidisciplinary practices that weren't multidisciplinary practices 3 years ago, but in order to keep things in-house are. But they never went and changed their designation with their MAC. So you've got docs who are internal medicine doctors who then bring in cardiologists, neurologists. They bring in this specialty, that specialty, and they're still listing themselves as internal medicine. And now all of a sudden they're billing out for neurology work. Well, it may be fully documented. It may be good to go, but someone's going, hey, this doesn't look right. You're billing for these. Are these designated health services? All these things that sort of interplay in with Stark that are just so complicated that 3 chuckleheads like us are, where I say that when it comes to this kind of stuff, I'm cocktail chatter. It's new sports weather. You get another, you've got to have conversations with these things. And I say all the time to our clients, hey, look, this is Eric's friendly advice. Eric's friendly advice is this doesn't pass the stink test, but let's get on the phone with somebody who's going to give you something beyond just friendly advice on this, because that's really where it is. And that's really where the problem is. Now, the flip side is that OIG agents are going to have cocktail chatter level knowledge as well. But the problem is that they're going to be reaching out to those CMS subject matter experts who are going to say, yeah, this is a problem. This is not a problem. And, and that's why you got to be in front of all of these things as these rules come into play.
That's right. All right, Jordan, you've gotten a break for the last bit of time, man. So
I love it. I know that means gotta step it up this next time on episode 11.
Oh no, you're not getting off that easy on episode 10, my friend. So obviously, look, we talk about this all the time, and there's no hiding from it. The government's going to continue to investigate. They're going to continue their data mining. Talk about what you all at Onco Spark and what you personally are doing in creating a lot of these incredible tools that I see coming out all the time from you to help practices and organizations with their own internal data mining.
Well, that's been kind of what's been, it's been unique. It's been frustrating. It's been fun. But a lot of people don't understand is the data. They just don't understand the data. They know data's out there. They don't know why it's important. They don't know how to relate it. And so we've created a bunch of tools and solutions and approaches to be able to help people unify that data, isolate that data, start tracking coding patterns, trending patterns, financial patterns, to where people can start to identify where these possible weak points are, where these gaps are. And to Eric and to your point, to y'all's point, is it's a lot better to proactively identify these. And you're going to have to do it. Gone are the days that somebody's going to open a chart and just read a chart and say, okay, we looked at 2 charts. We're going to extrapolate that to 10,000. We have the ability with data and processing to be able to look at this in totality, and then let the data tell us where some of those possible gaps are. And then we go look at documentation and really start to match things up. And I think that's where we're seeing the biggest push right now is, all the EHRs and EMRs, it's all about AI, machine learning, and there's these automated reports, but are they really adding any value? Case in point is, as we move into value-based care, all our reimbursements are based on how accurate our coding and documentation were for the past 4 or 5 years. So how accurate was that? And when CMS says, how do you want to comment on this model? Or how would I even perform under this model? You have to know your data. You have to know their data. And what does that look like? And so that's really what our team at Onco Spark is really focused on, primarily in oncology, and then rapidly have kind of expanded outside into radiology, home health, and other specialties that are looking for the same thing. And it is just knowing how to look at the data, manipulate the data, and manipulate it again to where decisions can be made that show your risk and possibly show opportunity where things are. You can't, Eric always says this, you can't run from the data. Used to, it was so much easier. And, if you get that letter in the mail, the knock at the door, the phone call from one of the auditors, they're not calling to see if. They've already looked at the data. They've seen where the outliers are. How do you compare to the people around you? And so that's what we've done. So, and that's, again, the key to that is exactly what we all do here, guys, subject matter experts and understanding the data. You can't just have one or the other. You got to be able to have them both, because again, we can take a straight data person and it makes sense with the data, but unless you have that clinical relevance to understand, you're wasting your time.
Absolutely. My friend Eric, you guys are doing a lot of incredible stuff, just like what we're working on. And, I'm excited that you and I have been able to partner up. We are working now together on multiple upcoming cases that we have agreed to take on. And I think it's important for people to understand that, the number of cases that we take on, we don't just take on cases to take on a case. We take on cases where there's a legitimate answer or response, if you will, to the allegations that are being made against an organization. But I think for us, especially this very first case that we're taking on, it's an ENT practice, right? And there's millions of dollars that are at stake. But right now, these attorneys that we're getting ready to engage with, they've done a really, really good job to help convince the Department of Justice to slow down, give us an opportunity before you bring formal charges and you move forward with, indictment against this provider, to allow us to help you understand that the information on the 302 that you guys are looking at, or gals are looking at, there's some much needed explanations, as it's tied to the medically impossible days. It's tied to incident to services. It's tied to other things. Can you talk a little bit, and then we're going to do the Chucklehead Award of the Week. Can you talk a little bit about, what a 302 is, the importance of a 302, and how sometimes these things get misperceived?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two. So the FBI uses a form called the 302. It's just their form number. And that's the FBI's sort of standard form that they use when they document an interview report. HHS OIG uses a form called an OI3, but it's essentially the same thing. It's, you go out, you do an interview, you write notes, and then you go and you transcribe those notes in substance into the document. FBI again uses the form 302. HHS OIG uses form OI3. Other agencies use whatever form number that they are. And the point of that is to memorialize the notes, because typically the notes are my writings. They're my perception of what the person said. They could be wildly off. They could be wildly inaccurate. but they are my perceptions. It is my assumptions of what was said. Hopefully a good agent takes copious notes, and a good agent is asking appropriate follow-up questions to get clarification of what was said, or what the person's response was to something. But the interview report, or the 302, during a trial, when an agent is on the stand who is the author of that report will be the subject of both direct examination, but more importantly, it will be the subject of cross-examination ad nauseum. I have had my interview reports put in front of me with my handwritten notes, where defense attorneys will go line by line. And the whole purpose may not be to find something that's inconsistent. It's just to wear you down. If you've spent an hour interviewing someone and you've got 20 or 30 pages of notes and you've got a lengthy interview report, sitting on the stand going line by line, sentence by sentence, can wear you down immensely. And so it really is about taking that document and what's in it versus what's not in it. And did you write something in the report that's not reflective in the notes, and vice versa? And I could tell you, one of the things that I always would ingrain in agents that I mentored, and I held it for myself, was if I did an interview today, January 2nd, I would go home and I would start writing that report, if not that night, the very next day, so that my notes had a date that was contemporaneous with the report. And I can't tell you how many instances I had seen of agents who wrote a report, who took notes on an interview and then wrote up their report weeks or months later, and are putting things in the report that weren't in the notes, but were things that they recalled or whatever. My feeling was, if I was writing something in my report that wasn't reflective in the notes, there was a very good argument that I could make. It was a recollection, because I'm writing the report within 12 or 24 hours of the day that I did the interview.
Right.
And so it's much more contemporaneous. And so, one of the things that, that we look at now is, I want to see all those interview reports, and I want to see what's written. What are people saying? Does it make sense? I remember having, a case involving a doctor who was involved in telemarketing fraud. It's not telehealth fraud, telemarketing fraud. And the case came to us after a VA OIG agent and a DCIS agent, Defense Criminal Investigative Services, or DODIG, a DOD agent and a VA OIG agent, both of whom had done some peripheral work in healthcare, but weren't really healthcare agents, went out and interviewed a doctor. And in the course of the interview, the doctor made a comment about, well, I sign off on a prescription based upon my review of the chart. And they moved on. And they never asked the follow-up question, which was, what was contained in the chart, which was a question that I would have asked as a healthcare agent. The key point is that the chart was nothing more at the end of the day than the prescription that was in front of him.
Unbelievable.
And they just didn't know to ask that. And these were great agents, people I had known for years. They were phenomenal agents, but they weren't the subject matter experts of healthcare. They kind of knew a little bit because they dabbled. They weren't assigned, but they got this complaint. They went out. We got the case. We got involved a little later on, but and that became actually a very strong point of contention, because the provider's contract with the telemed company specifically enumerated that he was being paid $25 per chart review. The next piece of it was whether or not he was going to sign the script or not. But at the end of the day, that was actually an important question, because the chart review, there was no medical record. It was the prescription. And so he would say, well, I was paid per chart review. Now, he had a 100% approval rate.
Sure.
He wasn't denying any, but it just goes to show you that when you're reading these interview reports, the question that you really then have to say, when I looked at that interview report later on, the very first thing that I did was highlight that phrase. Yep. And say, what was there was no explanation of what the chart was. What was the chart? Yeah. And so the interview reports that are done and the questions that are asked of witnesses are always very important. Now, as you know, Sean, from doing this, and I had this conversation with someone recently, and I know we're short on time, but I had a conversation with someone recently. Your name came up in something, and I said, there's only a handful of people that I know of that have testified an inordinate number of times. One of them is a woman named Jean Stone, who was with CMS Region 2
Yep.
in New York for 46 or 48 years. Very, very dear friend of mine to this day. I've known her for 25 or 30 years. She's, at the time that she was working at CMS, she was probably the foremost authority. She actually, taught me a ton about healthcare fraud, testified more than anybody I know. But one of those top people is also you. You've testified in the full range of stuff, ALJ hearings, criminal, civil, administrative. Very few people get that experience. But as you know, it is oftentimes you don't get to know who your witnesses are until the day before or anything like that. And then the very first thing that you're doing is you want to look at the documentation that's going to be used. And the number one thing that you're going to are the interview reports.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Every single time those interview reports, and then I'm looking at depositions and I'm trying to find inconsistencies. I'm trying to find things that weren't well defined. You're 100% spot on. So, all right. So we are in the last moments here, and I think we all agreed unanimously on the Chucklehead of the week, right? When we talked about this previously. So drum roll. The very the very first Chucklehead of the Week award goes to the co-owner of a North Carolina durable medical equipment company who was sentenced to prison for their role in defrauding Medicaid. They filed hundreds of claims, but most recently, 43 of the claims were filed for patients that had been deceased for years prior to the false claims even being submitted. And the scheme resulted in an estimated loss of approximately $10 million to the Medicaid program. This is why our Social Security system is insolvent. But just so you know, and I think this is one of the cases where freaking justice was served, man. Let me just tell you. The court denied the request for supervised release. This individual is going to jail for a very, very long period of time. Again, I will post this to our feed at the conclusion so you all can read the entire DOJ release. This was just August 27th of 2021. This is our very first named Chucklehead of the Week award. So, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the episode 10. This was our milestone. And a lot of people are going, come on, guys, really? Episode 10? Yes. You have to understand the three guys that are sitting on this stream right now. We are without a doubt the odd couple. But I will tell you this. I couldn't find two other guys who I would rather be doing this kind of stuff with. The level of experience, the professionalism that these gentlemen exhibit day in and day out, the knowledge base that these guys have is just spectacular. And the truth is, they do it with a lot of humor. They do it with a ton of passion. And for me, I just feel thoroughly blessed to have gone on this journey with these two guys. And I can't tell you enough how much I enjoy doing this podcast with you guys. It's just so much fun.
That's awesome. I mean, high energy, high impact.
That's it, man.
This is a perfect time to end because Eric's out of coffee. So
that's right. And the one thing that I do want to say, folks, listen, as always, we greatly appreciate you tuning in, hanging out with us. We went a little bit longer than the normal hour that we do, but I think for me and for the guys, I think we believe it was well worth it, and we hope that you all feel the same way. If you're enjoying the podcast, please get this out to others in the community. We do this for free. We do this because it's so hard as healthcare professionals that are tasked with doing the jobs that you all are doing every single day to have the time to read, digest and really disseminate the kind of information that we're trying to get across to you all. The final thing also, folks, this COVID Delta variant, as well as the other variants that we're starting to learn about, this stuff, you got to take it seriously. During our podcast today, I was just notified that a young 25-year-old was put into the hospital yesterday with COVID. Family was called into the hospital today. A young lady who has been working for a medical practice, 32 years old, was placed into the hospital. She's now been vented 2 separate times. Folks, regardless of, what your thoughts are, and Eric, Jordan, and I, we talked about this, please stop listening to celebrities who are trying to give you medical information and who are trying to tell you what you should and shouldn't be doing as far as a vaccine or things like that. Listen to the healthcare professionals. Don't listen to Sean Weiss or Eric Rubenstein or Jordan Johnson. Listen to science. Listen to the medical professionals. Again, make your own decisions. This is the wonderful thing about our country. Y'all have the right to do what works for you. But again, understand that, with making certain decisions come certain risks, not only to yourself, but to your loved ones and to others as well that you come in contact with. Boston Red Sox, as a prime example, 3/4 of the team in 1 week now is all on the COVID injured list. So, guys, take this stuff seriously. As always, be good to yourself, but more importantly, be good to each other. And from Eric, Jordan, and myself, thank you all. God bless you. And we'll see you next week for episode 11.